Okay, I'm Anna Sethi, and I'm a representative of Brent Friends of Palestine, which was formed in January 2015 by a group of local people who seek to publicise the situation in the occupied Palestinian territories of Gaza, West Bank and East Jerusalem. We support Palestinians and Israelis who take non-violent action to oppose the Israeli occupation and the blockade of Gaza. We oppose all forms of racism, which includes anti-Semitism, and have welcomed the Amnesty International report, which came out in February 2022, and gives considerable evidence as to how Israel is a state that practices apartheid. Desmond Tutu declared about 10 years ago that what he saw in the occupied Palestinian territories was even worse than what existed in South Africa in relation to the subjugation of one people by another. Brent Friends of Palestine have organised a number of public meetings, recently on Zoom of course, but before the pandemic in person, which consider various aspects of the situation in the occupied territories, Israel, and Palestinian refugee camps. There are educational meetings raising awareness, enabling our supporters and the wider public to be better informed. Another key part of our work is to support the Palestine Trauma Centre in Gaza, and particularly to raise funds for their Days of Joy project, which enables many children and young people to take part in fun, drama, play and sporting activities and receive therapy where appropriate. In the last 6 months of 2021, the project was used by 5,000 children, 1,000 parents and carers, and had 10,000 views of their educational and fitness videos. They are a very impressive organisation, set up by Dr. Atawal in 2007. Since our first appeal in 2015, for the Days of Joy project, Brent Friends of Palestine have raised over £43,000 through concerts, comedy nights, street and mosque collections, and so we hope to go on supporting this wonderful, what we believe is a very good charity in Gaza. We have close contact with Mohammed Atawal, who set it up, who now lives in Hatfield, and we have Zoom meetings with the team that work in Gaza, telling us about the situation there, their work, the issues relating to their effectiveness. Everyday life in Gaza is shaped by Israeli policy, which has turned this coastal enclave into an open-air, maximum security prison, where the inmates are children, mothers, fathers, grandparents, whose only crime is being Palestinian and being born in Gaza. There are 2 million people living in Gaza, 70% of whom are registered as refugees, as they are descendants of families displaced from areas of Palestine, which became the new state of Israel during the Nakba in 1948, which we are commemorating today. The small size of Gaza, 360 square kilometres, just 25 miles from north to south, about as far as here to Windsor, and 4 to 6 miles from west to east, about as far as here to central London. It means it is one of the most overcrowded areas in the world. 95% of the water supply is contaminated. People can't afford to buy bottled water. They use desalinated seawater. 50% are unemployed, much higher amongst young adults. Rarely more than 3 hours of electricity per day, limited schooling, constant Israeli drones overhead, snipers, and no way to get out. We cannot be silent about this. Silent means we are complicit with this inhumane situation.
All right. Thanks very much, Anna. Right. The next contribution should be from Firmin, who is speak on behalf of Brent and Harrrow Palestine Solidarity Campaign.
Thanks, John. No, certainly won't go into that long history. Yeah, I'm pleased to come speak on behalf of Brent and Harrrow PSC today, commemorating Land Day, marking the destruction of Palestinian villages. It was very close already, Michael. Yeah, and the continuing, ongoing destruction of Palestinian villages by settlers, by the Israeli state, and the fight of the Palestinians to defend that land. On the news today, they were talking about whether there's a new wave of terror against Israelis. And if they actually reported accurately what goes on in Israel and Palestine, they would report that there's a permanent wave of terror against the Palestinians. But that gets forgotten in the media. I want to point out that while they apparently can put sanctions on Russia very quickly, could refer it to the International Criminal Court, and argue that Russia is committing war crimes, we have been arguing for many, many years that Israel is committing war crimes, that Israel is breaking international law, and yet nothing happens. We need to keep up that pressure for action against Israel. Just a few of the coming things that Brent and Harrrow PSC is involved in. We're involved in the ongoing campaign to get Puma to stop its sponsorship of the Israeli football team. There is a campaign to get Brent Council, our local council, to divest its pension funds from companies complicit in the occupation in Israel. We would urge comrades to get involved in that. And we intend, now that the pandemic is over, or virtually over, hopefully, to have regular stalls in Kilburn and Harrow, and we would hope that comrades will join in that. So solidarity for Brent and Harrow PSC.
Thanks, Peter. Don't forget to do your story.
So, Ken, you tell your own story. Well, thanks very much. Can I just say, I've not just been accused of being anti-Semitic, I've been accused of being corrupt, alcoholic, violent, tax dodging. Literally, if you're genuinely a socialist, you get all these lies and smears. Remember what Jeremy Corbyn had to put up with when the establishment were terrified we might finally have a socialist prime minister. But I was just born in South London, 1945, working class kid, and I grew up totally unaware of what was being done to the Palestinians. All I ever remembered very briefly on the news was stuff praising Israel. I never saw a single programme in my youth talking about what had been imposed on the Palestinians. And it was only when I was 20 and I went hitchhiking through North Africa, and in Algeria I just happened to bump into a couple of Palestinians who took me to their local campaign HQ, and I just remember that day sitting there in total disbelief as they told me what had happened to them, and wondering, why have I never seen any of this in the British news? And the simple fact is, here we are, over 70 years on, and this injustice continues day by day by day. Every Israeli government has failed to tackle the biggest problem and legacy of the creation of the State of Israel, the plight of the Palestinians. I would have been delighted to see an Israeli government put all the abuse behind and create a genuine Arab and Jewish state, where Arab and Jew could live side by side, could work together. All of that I would have prayed to see. But still today, the injustice continues. And it's not just the loss of lives, it's the appalling squalor of people living in camps in Gaza and other parts of the Middle East, unable to achieve their full potential. So let's challenge every lie about the Palestinians. Let's make certain every politician is forced to come to face the reality. But I remember when I became an MP in 1987, I made a speech about what was happening to the Palestinians and the role Israel had played. And after that speech, several Labour and Tory MPs came up to me and said, I thought that was a wonderful speech. It's just that I can't ever make one like that because I'll get so much harassment. And oddly enough, I had a bit of that. But never give in. I mean, we get a bit of abuse. As I said at the start, I mean, anyone who criticises the policies of the Israeli government is denounced as anti-Semitic. And that undermines challenging genuine anti-Semitism. And let's remember, anti-Semitism is most likely the longest form of racism in British history. I mean, no, in world history, going back over 2,500 years. And I just want to see the election of a government in Israel that's going to put the past behind them and create a genuine two-type state where Arab and Jew can live side by side in peace and achieve their potential. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ken. So grateful to Ken. I mean, as the speaker was saying that he has suffered from arthritis. And Virginia.
I want to endorse what's already been said and just to emphasise a few points. The BBC reported that 5 were killed by a Palestinian gunman in the latest deadly attack on Israel. And they go into some great detail about who they were and what had happened to them, etc., who their relations were and the funerals. However, the BBC do not report, as Pete has already mentioned, what the actual terrorist state is doing, Israel. We have some statistics going back to 2008. In the year 2008, there was 3,202 Palestinians killed in this conflict and 853 Israelis. One of the worst years that people will remember was 2014. In 2014, there was 19,860 Palestinians killed and 2,796 Israelis. And the proportion is similar all the years from 1948 right up to the present, right up to last May, when the shocking statistics were on view again. We do know that Israel is a terrorist state. We do know what it does. But Israel is the protege of the United States. And if we all remember when we talk about the International Criminal Court, etc., when it comes to the United States, it doesn't recognize the International Criminal Court. Do you remember back when George W. Bush was about to invade Iraq? They asked him, one reporter asked him, well, isn't this illegal? Isn't it against international law? And George W. Bush simply laughed and he said, against international law, is it? I must consult my lawyer. And everybody guffawed. It was such a joke that the United States should ever respect international law. But thank you for that. Cheers.
Gerry, can you just fill in a little bit there? Thank you. Great. Thank you, Gerry, darling. Good cheers. Yeah. One person I think I'd like to hear is the youngest person, Yasser Jbara. Come here, Yasser, come here. Now, here's a little bit of history for you. The very first tree that ever was planted here for Palestine was by this boy, when he was a little boy, and his dad over here, Ben Jbara. Oh, look what you've done. Right, okay. So what I'm going to do is ask Yasser to read a prepared speech, yeah? He's only 16 and looks like he's miles taller than me, but there you are. He is, and he's the future of this campaign. Yasser, it's all yours.
Thank you. Wednesday, March the 30th, marked the 46th anniversary of the Eternal Land Day, which the Palestinians commemorate annually to honor the memory of the 1976 events in which the Palestinian masses gathered from the Galil to the Negev in in protest against the Israeli policies, procedures and decisions related to the confiscation of thousands of dunams of land that belonged to the Palestinians, where the masses were confronted with excessive use of force by the Israeli army and police, killing 6 civilians and wounding dozens. The occasion comes this year with the Israeli occupation's insistence to carry out ethnic cleansing crimes against the Palestinian people and their rights. These crimes, which are being perpetrated in a deliberate manner based on an approach reinforced by racism, extremism, murder, theft of land from Palestinians, and depriving them of exercising their right to determine their political destiny. Over the years of its military occupation of the Palestinian lands, especially in the West Bank and Jerusalem, the Israeli occupation authorities have persisted in perpetuating colonial settlement and adopting a policy of deliberate land appropriation and annexation, Judaizing the city of Jerusalem, demolishing homes, preventing construction, erecting the wall, establishing and expanding the construction of settlements, separating the West Bank cities and villages from each other. The continuation of racial discrimination policies against Palestinian citizens in the 48 areas, and the continuation of the siege on the Gaza Strip, taking advantage from state of international silence of the one hand and from the successive US measures on the other. The International Commission to Support Palestinian Rights shares our Palestinian people the commemoration of Land Day, condemns the continuation of the Israeli military occupation in Palestine, renews its strong condemnation of the ongoing Israeli crimes of annexing the occupied territories and forced displacement. It reminds the international community of the tragedy and suffering that the Palestinian people have been subjected to since 1948 due to the crimes of the Israeli occupation, which has caused the Palestinians to live in a state of asylum and dispersion. ICSPR also reaffirms the right of the Palestinians to confront and resist the Israeli occupation and its denial of legitimate and inalienable rights for the Palestinian people, including the right to self-determination and the right of refugees to return to their land, and stresses that the grave violations of human rights and international humanitarian law committed by the Israeli occupation forces against the Palestinian people during the past years constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity with no state of limitations, and that the perpetrators must be held accountable and prosecuted, and the victims must be readdressed. Therefore, ICSPR expresses its deep concern about the Israeli executive, judicial and legislative policies and practices, especially those related to the appropriation of land and the Judaization of Jerusalem, and the continued establishment and expansion of settlements to change the demographic and geographical character of the Palestinian territories in the 48 areas and the occupied territories in 1967, a way that prevents establishing an independent Palestinian state.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, sir. Please, let's have the pleasure of your, please drop that out tree, yeah? You're likely to see this tree grow up, I don't know about myself, but, yeah, right. I mean, if nobody has anything else particular to say, okay, I see some people here from, so thankful that you could make it.
Thank you, John, thank you. Selma, as I am, we are founders of the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, and I'll just say a few words about that organizing. So we are committed to struggles for liberation, of which the Palestinian people are an indispensable part of our organizing. We are committed to the right of return of Palestinian people as refugees, and we support their right to resist occupation. We follow a great Jewish tradition expressed by Marek Edelman, who was one of the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. He said, "To be a Jew means always being with the oppressed and never the oppressors." And we know that Israel are the oppressors. We consider the boycott movement to be the great anti-racist movement of our time. I want to remind us that it was on Land Day in 2018 when Palestinians launched the Great March of Return. And despite Israeli snipers targeting children, women, medics, the press, people with disabilities, the demonstrations continued for 18 months. It was a great moment. The Board of Deputies of British Jews attempted to justify the massacre that happened at that time against unarmed people. We wrote an open letter condemning their support for repression, bombing, murder, war crimes, and apartheid. It was signed by over 100 Jewish people, including Ronnie Casrills, Michael Rosen, Gillian Slovo, and of course Selma James, who was absolutely planning to be here. I also want to let you know about another great initiative, the Stop the JNF campaign. So the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, is central to the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, has been central for 100 years to the Zionist ethnic cleansing. They build parks and forests to hide villages that they have destroyed in 48 and 67. They are hiding crime scenes, as well as stealing land and water from Bedouin communities in the Negev and illegally acquiring lands and houses in occupied Jerusalem. I have to tell you, with the help of Roman Abramovich, who has spent $100 million in supporting very far right-wing settler organizations in order to throw Palestinians out of their homes. The JNF calls itself Israel's leading humanitarian and environmental charity. It even has charitable status here in the UK. We campaign to get rid of its charitable status. In fact, we have an early day motion in Parliament, which first did 10 years ago, which was initiated by Jeremy Corbyn. We want to change the political climate so that when the JNF is mentioned, people will think of land and water theft, complicity with apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and the destruction of the environment, including even the soil. Zionism is racism. Zionism is apartheid, and we have to get rid of it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Don't forget, Miles, put a little bit of sand on the soil. Right. If there's anybody... And the last word will go to Carol Foster, who's got a poem to read for us. As our tradition, it's not tradition very long, but Carol has always wound up or organised our events with our little speech.
Jewish old woman from round Wembley Park, not too far. Being a nice Jewish woman, I believe in justice. And because I believe in justice, of course I believe that Palestine must be free. Hopefully in my lifetime, and I'd like to read my little poem. If it doesn't keep on going off, let me do it again. Here we are. We sow the seeds of justice. It really is the time to gather all your plowshares and plant for Palestine. And all the trees around you have been watered by our tears. So many lives have perished through these wasted years. We plant a tree for freedom. We plant to ease the pain. We plant to honour the fallen and say never again. Yes, we are humble farmers planting for victory, and we pray in our lifetimes that Palestine will be free.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carol. Can you decorate our tree, please, with your little piece of stuff? Yeah. Food apparently provided here by the Jbara family.